Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first ever Zenith podcast. We are going to be your hosts. My name is Keith O'Donnell.
Hi, I'm Patrick Downing.
Yep, we're going to get better at those awkward silences in the future, I promise. So we are going to kick off this podcasting series, which, if you're not familiar with what we do, we are part of FINOS, the FinTech Open Source Foundation, and both of us, as well as our third colleague who's not on the podcast today, Peter, we all run the Zenith Special Interest Group. The Zenith Special Interest Group is focused on emerging technology, specifically within fintech, and how do we create better open source ways to rapidly increase adoption while also decreasing risk and making everything a little bit more enterprise ready.
So let's start off with asking the fundamental questions. What is an emerging technology? Why are we focusing on it? And what is it to start with?
Yeah. So for me, it was always the fun gadgety stuff. Like the emerging technologies in my mind are always the things that you can't just get off the shelf. So from my perspective, it's always the stuff that like you have to go a little bit digging around in, some weird GitHub repo or looking at some like proprietary build and piecing things together and stuff like that. Like that's where I feel emerging technology lives. I mean, if you think about the real core of it, it's really stuff that's sitting in a lab that people are doing academic research on. And then you're starting to see the early sort of parts of it being commercialized. There may be some commercial aspects of the fundamental discipline, but not the whole discipline. So, like, for example, the stuff we're looking at in Zenith at the moment is really focused around AI. And there's so much talk around like generative AI, but like ChatGPT and some of the cool stuff that can do. But then it's like not, it's really not ready for prime time. Like it's all experimental. It's like loads of different scales of proof of concepts. And so I think it's fascinating getting into that kind of technology and helping to sort of turn the weird sci-fi stuff that you read about in books when you were younger and making it into something. Because I mean that's mostly what we're doing now. We're seeing like with Star Trek technology now becoming real. We've evolved past like flip top mobile phones and stuff, and we've got like medical diagnostic scanners that can use different sensor arrays to look at all different components within your body. We haven't quite got it handheld yet, and we're now going into like RNA engineered vaccines for things like coronavirus. Like, it's fascinating the evolutions in technology we're seeing, but then specifically, how does that fit into fintech? How does that start to fit into our whole world? I think that's where the real interest lies in emerging technology.
It's funny you mentioned Star Trek and some of the sci-fi aspects. As you were kind of diving into the initial explanation to what emerging technology was, that was one of the first things that popped into my mind, and probably with a lot of other people's minds as well. And it's cool to say that we're trying to help get to that point. I mean, we're arguably a little bit far off from teleporters and whatnot, but there's you mentioned the use case of the tricorder, and that kind of flip phone analogy to what was I don't know 20 years ago, and we've already evolved past that point now. So something that were considered emerging technology 50, 60, 70 years ago are actually already in our rearview mirror. And now we're looking at the next iteration of things to come. You mentioned, with the focus on financial services and fintech specifically, but a lot of that kind of spearheads what is going to be happening in the industry or in the world outright. It's a very interesting space to be involved in.
Oh yeah, I mean the AI stuff just now, where you're starting to see the chatbots. I mean, you look back on like Star Trek and stuff, they were hitting that little button and like computer do this, do that, and I mean that's just instead of saying computer, it's ChatGPT or Siri or Alexa or something. We're seeing these things. I mean, we're not quite like jetpacks and flying cars and lightsabers and, as you said, teleportation. But I mean, the theory behind those things is real. I mean, you and I both love nerding out about different stuff we saw on YouTube, and we've seen like the plasma lightsabers that some people have made, and with our both of our shared interest in quantum computing as well, like taking a look at that's going to be the type of calculations that are going to be needed when you're thinking about matter transposition. Like at the moment, I know it's data teleportation that you're kind of doing in the lab and stuff with quantum, but starting to think that maybe in our lifetime, maybe in like the next generation's lifetime, that could be real. That's spooky, but awesome. That's what gets me excited. Like I go to bed in the morning and want to go and tackle emerging technology problems just because, like, I know there's going to be this one breakthrough one day that's going to be like, and I'm going to love it. Um, but yeah, that's like my core reasoning for getting in.
Well, it's just interesting. You mentioned, spooky actions at a distance. I'll expand upon your analogy, and it kind of brings a good kind of segue topic. You kind of started going down that route, but let's flesh it out a little bit more. Which is, how did we get involved in this? Like you mentioned, hey, we're nerding out. We really like this when we're growing up. We kind of dove into it a little bit more, but let's talk a bit more about tangibly how we got involved in the space.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a weird and wacky story on my side, and then it sort of segs into your story because I think I dragged you in kicking and screaming at one point. Um, but my thing started off years and years and years ago in a school called Hamilton College, and I had this one biology teacher called Mr. Wensley, and he, for whatever reason, took exception to me wanting to study this particular subject. Like I'd taken this aptitude test right in school, and it was like when you were picking your final subjects before you would go towards university, like the year before you would do those subjects. We got this aptitude test that was like, what career would you be best suited on based on your mental profile, right? And it was like a BuzzFeed quiz for kids, right? And we sat down, we took it, and I had like no idea what I wanted to do. I was all over the place. Like for me, it was just enjoy yourself. I was one of the youngest in my class, so I didn't really have a structure to what I was going. I sat and I took this test, and the top result was geneticist, and I was like, damn, that sounds amazing fun. Would I need to do genetics? And like, obviously, clearly, biology was like the number one subject you would need. And I was like, right. So I've got maths, I've got English, I've got chemistry, I've got physics. I don't have biology. And so, like in the Scottish education system in like the 90s and 2000s, we had this thing called standard grades and then hires. Your standard grades is like your foundational chosen subjects. Then your hires were like your pre-university subjects. So you got like 8 standard grades and then you got like 5 hires that you choose. So I went in with 5 higher selection. I selected biology, chemistry, maths, physics, English. And Mr. Wensley, who was the head of biology at our school, came and spoke to me and he was like, mate, I don't think you're smart enough to do this, right? Now, I'm like a cruising 51% on every test kid, right? Like, didn't take tests seriously. I've been a failed academic all the way through my life. And I get to this point where Mr. Wensley is looking at me and he's just like, there's no way you're going to pass biology. And me, in my standard effervescent Glaswegian way, was like, who is not going to pass biology? I'm going to do this. So I went and I crashed the biology hire, right? I took like, everybody else had like 2 years worth of biology knowledge over me. And I went to do it in 1 year. And I did it. I got like third top in the year. And I was like going up to Mr. Wensley. I was like, obviously want to swear, but I can't do it on the podcast. But there was a lot of like, get wrecked, who can't pass the biology hire. So I passed the biology hire, I get the acceptance to university, and then university's like, you're too young to do this degree. Because I was leaving school 16, and like legally I couldn't go work in the chemistry labs at the university for insurance purposes until I was like 18 or 7, like late 17 or something. So I went and took a gap year. And during that gap year, I was working in the construction industry and I was seeing all this wild stuff. I was working on building superconductor research facilities and I was working on like casinos and stuff. So I was meeting lots of shady people and lots of really cool, interesting, intelligent people. And I was like, this is really awesome. Like, and I was telling them like, I'm doing this in my gap year. I want to go study genetics. And they're like, oh, it's really interesting. Like we're using some like elements of genetic research at the moment within superconducting research, where we're using like quantum chemistry to look at this. And some of them gave me some really interesting insights that I took with me as I went to university. And I went to university and nosedived at uni. Like I had no attention whatsoever. I'd get into arguments with the lecturers and stuff like that. Like I was the worst student has ever been. And by the time I get to my third year at university, the university's like, please stop. And I'm like, cool, put me on a placement. I'll go out and I'll work. And they're like, cool. They send me out and I do this like 3-week course where I'm just a lab technician. And all I'm doing is programming centrifuge robot timings. And that's it for like 6 weeks. And I was like, this is hell. And I'm saying to the other guys, like, is this what being a geneticist is? And they're like, yeah, you do this for like 6 years, then maybe you get on a research project. And I'm like, what? And then I went back to university and all the like undergrads who, like I was part of the undergrad class, were helping out the postgrad folk. And they were all working on a human genome project. And I was like, I want to do that. And they're like, well, you're not allowed to do that. You're not qualified. And I was like, well, what else can I do? So they gave me the data and I started looking through the data. And this is what became like the key thing for me was data and problem solving. So I'd be studying this data and I was like, I don't want to do genetics. I want to do something more data line. I left the university, went back into construction because I made an absolute heck ton of money doing construction right before the banking collapse. And then the banking collapse happened and I lost a lot of stuff. And decided, right, okay, I'm going to re-educate myself. I went in, I got a degree in investment finance, I got a degree in contract law, and then came out. So I've got this weird CV of like construction, genetics, biotechnology, math, finance, legal stuff, right? And obviously the clear job was going to international shipping and logistics. And then from there, after I've saved this company millions on their shipping, and they ask for a raise, they say no. I end up darkening the doors of Morgan Stanley. I come in originally on maternity cover, and I just start creating things. I start making little tools to shortcut everything that I'm doing. My boss is like, you're creating too much technical debt, stop it. Rolled up newspaper, squirt gun, like full 9 yards. Eventually I've built like a full artificial intelligence system in an Excel spreadsheet and set the office on fire twice because it's the least effective or efficient way to have done it. And I've like overheated 6 computers that I've created a zombie botnet on, created a whole bunch of new info security policy, whole bunch of like precautions about how hardware is handled. And eventually just say, look, why don't you just get into innovation, right? We'll put you in a lab, a nice closed, sealed room where you can't do any harm, and like you come up with cool things. And I was like, that sounds awesome. So they gave me that. I eventually took over in Europe. It was like a game of Risk, right? I'm just rolling dice, taking over countries at this point. Budapest, I've got London, I've got Glasgow. And then I get into looking after like the innovation office for EMEA when they formulate the whole thing. And it's always been this like desire to solve problems and, you know, play games with puzzles and data that's always carried me through. I get drunk at a party once and all the recollection of all the quantum chemistry and quantum physics stuff. Like I maybe sat through 4 lectures when I was doing my genetics degree and then those conversations with the guys at the superconductor. I get drunk and end up talking to a professor who runs a company that does atomic clock laser components. Like the lasers that are being used on like almost every quantum machine at the moment. And I get talking to him, he tries to get rid of me and he goes into like quantum photonics and photonics based timing systems and how does quantum computing work using photonics based systems. Me, drunken adult state, perfect recollection of those exact 5 hours of my life that I've studied this. He's like, how do you know so much about this? I'm like, who do you work for? Oh, I work for this big Wall Street bank. He's like, what do they know about this? And I'm like, why would I tell them? You know? Next thing I know, I'm in a conversation with like the business development team and technology at Morgan. They're like, can you bring this guy in? Can you understand what he's talking about? We've been doing this other stuff in quantum about looking at these, I think it was the D-Wave 1 system at the time. And I was like, yeah, sure, I can take a look at it. And they give me the information on like Friday, and me, I just pop a couple of energy drinks and just consume it like full rabbit hole, like all this information in my head as aggressively as possible. And I get to the Tuesday, because I think it was a bank holiday Monday, so I come back on the Tuesday, and I phone the guy who's in charge of it, who we both know, but I don't want to name on the podcast. And he's like, what do you mean you've read everything? I was like, I read everything. These are the places where you went wrong. And he's like, hang on, we're organizing a call. We all got on this call. Next thing you know, he's like, we should have some like quantum focus group at the firm. Like you seem to be technically, you technically understand all this stuff. Like, I was like, yeah, sure, I've got a strategy for how we could do it as well. And that was like the key linchpin moment is when I started running that quantum group at Morgan. And then that led me to you because we had a mutual friend. And if I remember right, she was like, you just need to talk to this guy because he's just so all the time, doesn't stop talking. And you were like, yeah, okay, that sounds interesting. And then I got talking to you and you were like, whoa, hang on, like, stop, chill. And we'd known each other from the days of entitlements, but we hadn't really talked to each other. Like we kind of knew each other existed. And then we get into that weird conversation about quantum. And next thing you know, we're competing on like a national hackathon or something. IBM, wasn't it?
Exactly. Man, wow, that was a journey through your history there, Keith. going, like you mentioned, you've got a very varied set of talents from being a classically trained geneticist, construction to investment banking, and now bringing it all together with emerging technologies like quantum technology, among others. Um, that's to your point. You definitely pulled me into this latest kind of tranche of emerging technology or stint in emerging technology that I've been involved in. But even my background goes a little bit further back than that. Classically, my interest was always in math. Growing up, I was very much focused on the hard sciences and math. When I had the opportunity to go to university, my two options that I was looking at was either a traditional traditional bachelor's in mathematics or looking at something more applied like computer science. And I made a decision to go down the computer science route just because I told myself it's going to be more or less the same topics, and I'm going to be able to do more, have it more applicable, be able to apply it to more various things. And what that kind of kicked off was this route going down computer science, information security specifically. And the reason why I kind of fell in love with the cyber side of things was I loved getting to the point where computers do what you tell them to do, not what you want them to do, and getting to that very minutia of understanding the nut and bolt at the lowest levels of what's possible. And one of those things, as part of cyber, that really dovetailed nicely with my previous interest was cryptography, obviously. So I really liked understanding the cryptographic systems, understanding how they work from a mathematical concept, and then seeing how they were applied, and honestly replicating how they were applied in reality. So ended up, finishing my bachelor's, continued down the classical education route, did a master's in information security, continuing down that both practical and theoretical approach. And next thing you know, I find myself at Morgan Stanley as well. It's coming up on a decade since I started with them, and I started down the cybersec path. Kind of took a very interesting route in what I was kind of doing. I started off as a very broad, low depth level of pretty much anything that was related to security, network security, identity and access management, cryptography, IDS, IPS stuff, like pretty much everything. And kind of weaved my way through that, becoming more or less an identity and access management specialist through those years. But then where it kind of comes back to the emerging technology is that conversation that you're referring to. At this point, I think it was about 4 years ago that we had that conversation. And the way I describe it in conversation is, you and I had a coffee chat. You said, "Hey, there's this really cool quantum thing that's going on. Let's take a stab at it." And I said, "Sure, why not? Let's do it." And those, I think it was 72 hours. I forget, it was 2 or 3 days, but whatever, a long weekend that you and I got involved and got to be the first time that I hands-on touched quantum computing, really kickstarted this entire journey. I had, as part of my studies and part of just my general interest, had looked at quantum cryptography back in 2004, 2005 as part of like kind of that kickoff. But really back then it was purely theoretical. There was no hands-on. So this was, whatever that is, 15 years later, kind of looking at, hey, this was something that interested me more than a decade ago. And now I'm actually able to do it. And that's where I realized this is really cool. This is something I want to get involved in. And that kind of, like I said, kicked off that journey where started getting hands-on myself in quantum cryptography, or quantum computing in general, quantum cryptography being one of them. And we kind of grew that organically to not just being a side interest, to making, hey, this is something we should be looking at from an organizational level, from an industry level, from a world applicability level. And over the last 4 years, we've built that up. So I don't want to go too much into that topic right now. This is kind of how we got to where we're at today.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting path how pretty much anyone and everyone can get to this point. It's just a matter of what interests you, and saying yes to a conversation that randomly
Mhm.
comes by.
Yeah.
You never know where you will end up just by having these conversations or just by saying, why not? Let's give that a shot.
Yeah.
Who
And I
knows?
mean, like some of the conversations we've had over the years as well have been illuminating. Like I still remember times where you'd come back from some like capture the flag event. You were like, I got to hack a Super Nintendo. And I'd be like, right, okay, I'm clearing the rest of my afternoon. I need to hear about this now. And it's kind of like always been the thread of our relationship has just been like one of us comes in, I have found this really cool thing. You need to look at it. And the other one being like, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh.
Absolutely. And yeah, you bring up the Super Nintendo. Bring the bring the tear to my eye just thinking about those kind of situations because not to age us, but Super Nintendo was one of the first platforms we grew up on, and I remember playing my very first game on the N64,
Mhm,
and thinking this is when polygons were starting to come out, like basically the initial 3D type video
mhm,
games were coming out. I remember as a very young kid thinking, "Wow, this is really cool," and this is this is something that someone built. Like this is something that we can do, we can create.
mhm,
And now obviously we've kind of evolved greatly as
mhm,
far as the video game industry goes, but it brings it all back to what we were talking earlier, where what we once considered emerging technology, or what we once consider emerging technology, is just commonplace in our futures.
mhm,
So we're talking about, quantum photography, we're talking about a whole bunch of other things that we're looking at and saying, this is cool, or hey, this has been theoretically proven. And this is now a engineering problem more than a science problem. But, who knows, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, people are going to be looking at, oh yeah, that old thing. Yeah, sure. We moved on from that. This
mhm,
is no longer, part of our issue. But
mhm,
that's why we're doing what we do. We
mhm,
want to get to that point because if no one like us is looking at these problems and getting that interest built in,
mhm.
then we will never get to that point.
Yeah.
And it requires people to be interested in this and have a collaborative way to kind of jump in and say like, yeah, you're not alone. There are people that are interested in doing this, and there's a real tangible benefit to looking at this and exploring these kind of topics.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, and that takes us really well into like the stuff that we're doing today. We're just coming off the back of the first ever brain trust call from Zenith today, which was, kind of scary for me because it's the first time I'm pulling all these like industry experts into a room and it's like all closed door and like only members allowed kind of thing. It's the first time I've ever chaired something like that. So that's a little bit, when you come off of that call. But now we're at the stage where, like, we've created this Zenith program and we've started to look at, just as you've said, how do we get people not only enthusiastic about these things, but how do we get them to understand the fundamentals? How do we give them a springboard to go off and start experimenting? And I think that that was always like the key design element that we've always had when we've been thinking about this. Because I mean, this isn't like the first iteration of this program that we've came up with. We tried to run this internally within the firm, and it just wasn't going to be a right fit. Just that the timing was off on it, and we suddenly get this opportunity that um, we opened up the dialogue with FINOS, and FINOS, great organization. They've got some great member organizations, and Morgan's one of those member organizations. And they were able to help us sort of formulate, well, realistically on emerging technology, it's not something that one group has to solve. It's a thing that a whole industry's got to solve. And so I remember us going through all the pitching stuff, going from like, what was that, February of this year through to like May? It was tons of work that we had to do to sit and pitch it out. We got it through the governance committee and they got agreed. And then we had our first ever SIG meeting in July. Now, like, we're what, four SIG meetings deep and we've moved it to like the monthly schedule. I mean, they're obviously a lot of fun because we have a lot of fun in the SIG meetings. Having that now that we've got this community of developers who are looking at different technologies and we're focused on AI at the moment, we've now got this roadmap for some of the other technologies. We've got some prototype projects we're going to be starting on. I know that Paulina, who's one of the devs in the Zenith program with us, and I are going to be building an augmented reality application for OSFF. I believe you and Peter are going to be in New York at OSFF. Is that
that is the plan. Hopefully, we'll be able to see a bunch of folks there. But yeah, that's planning on being there and representing both Zenith, emerging technology, FINOS in general, and just
Mhm.
seeing everyone in the industry.
Well, here's hoping that the application that we build doesn't like screw up on a day, you know? No pressure. So
Yeah.
we're going to be on the other side of the Atlantic, like, job's done. But like, the conversation's been crazy. Like, all the different people we've met starting up Zenith and some of the interesting stories and anecdotes I've heard so far. And it's eye opening every day when we come and we keep working on this project.
So one of the things you talked about was kind of like how we've gotten to where we've gotten. So some of the challenges, the structure, that kind of aspect. But something that's probably worth highlighting more so is why this iteration? You said we've tried this a couple different times. So can you talk through some of the challenges we have run into? I mean, it's been, near and dear to our hearts the last couple of years, and why we've settled on the FINOS model as a special interest group, and what are we trying to get right this time through the FINOS Zenith group that would not have been possible from some of the other iterations.
Yeah, so like the first iteration that we had of this was we tried to build out working groups that were focused on it, but it was too insular. It was focused on how do we bring this into just one company. And what we very quickly realized was without sizable investment from senior leadership, both in terms of time and priority and money, it just wasn't going to go anywhere. And obviously, when you're working in like a single company, you've got a lot of different commitments that are really critical. You know, I mean, that's not a slight on any business. Like businesses have to prioritize both where they make money, where they save money, where they reduce risk. You know, it's very key that they keep themselves operationally fit and lean because that's what they're there to do. They're there to make money. They're there to perpetuate their business. And going to spend like, for example, at one point we were looking at something that was going to be like a $6 million a year outlay for like 3 years to go and do something where you were like, what was the return on investment? We were like, you know, that's not going to fly, you know. So definitely we had to pivot. We then tried to take it into more of a grassroots thing, and again we hit the pressures of you really need buy-in, you know, and it's playing poker with the big boys. If you can't afford the buy-ins and stuff like that, like the bets and things, like you're just going to get bought out, and no one's going to take you seriously. So going from the grassroots thing, what we did actually manage to do was understand community building a lot better. And it's definitely something that we're leveraging now in this iteration. We then came out and decided, like, let's completely reinvent everything from the ground up. And at that point, I was changing careers as well. I went out to become an individual consultant. So I didn't have the pressures of I need to fit into the organization anymore. I don't have all these rules. I don't have all these stakeholders. I don't have shareholders. I don't have salary, but that's another issue. And it was like a lot of the constraints were free. And I was like, right, well, let's really think about this. If I was going to try and do this as an industry thing, how would I want to do it? So I started looking at things like OpenAI, and OpenAI had a lot of different companies buy into, and it was a consolidated effort to try and solve a common problem that everybody was going to face. Now, that makes a lot of sense. Now, back during my time trying to set up these previous iterations, I'd helped to involved in some of the FINOS organization work. We used to run that through the innovation labs, which I was part of, and I'd helped to create some of the business justification as to why we should engage with FINOS, why we should develop stuff. And that led to one of our mutual friends and colleagues, Stephen Goldbaum and Attila Mahali, working on the Morphia project, which is a low-code solution that FINOS offers. And that was my intro into FINOS. And I always kind of knew about it in the background, but once I'd left, I'd obviously kept in touch with you. I'd kept in touch with Peter, and Peter said, "Why don't you come and talk to the FINOS guys? Like, they would really love to hear some of your ideas or thinking about an emerging or horizon technology, as we called it at the time, innovation plan." I went, okay. So I came along and I met some of them and I talked them through my ideas. They went, "This is exactly what we would love to do. Like at the moment, we're so focused on, architecture as code and interoperability and inner source and open source readiness and, having companies understand the value of having an open source project office. We'd love to have something a little bit more forward looking." And so we ended up talking to Gab and his team. at FINOS, and they were like, yeah, why don't you come pitch it to the, what was it, the technical steering committee or technical management committee? It's either TSC or TMC, I can never remember. And I put the pitch together and I said, well, I remember coming to you and saying, how would you like to take the quantum working group like global, like outside of the firm? And you were like, sounds good. Don't know how we do it. I went, I've got a plan, which is usually what I say to you. And Peter, he was the same. His focus was on spatial computing, so like all the augmented reality, virtual reality, metaverse. I said, well, what if we could solve the common problems in a sort of collaborative effort across the whole industry? You know, so with FINOS, it was all the different members on Wall Street coming together, as well as some of the major technology providers that I thought, like, in theory, we're all trying to solve the same core issues. So why don't we do that together? We can split the costs, we can split perspectives, we can cover each other's weaknesses and bases. We've got a much wider audience of people who could actively contribute to the projects. And then if we think about like the benefits of open source, the transparency, how you can go in and review the code bases, but also how you can have the collaborator communities within there. It broadens the horizons of employees within the FINOS membership. So it was like a win for everybody. And when we pitched it to the steering committee, and the steering committee were like, yeah, like unanimous thumbs up across the board. I'm like, relief, you know, because you're always like second guessing yourself, like, am I taking crazy pills? Like, it feels really obvious to me, but like, is it just like I'm sitting there like, oh, clearly everybody else is wrong and I'm right, you know? But then getting that vote of confidence and then being invited down to London and going to the member meeting, get to present to some of the like most senior people in the industry who were there, like some of the people I'd looked up to when I was working at Morgan Stanley who were like significantly higher levels above me. And then having them come up and being supportive of the plan, saying, how can we get involved? How can we help? And not just like at Morgan, like their equivalents at other organizations like JP Morgan, Goldman, Citibank, and you know, ever since then, we've had people from like Fannie Mae and Lloyd's and stuff getting involved with us. And you know, these are big, age-old institutions. This is like the firmament of finance. And then being like, yeah, what do you need? We will 100% help you. And it's been really, really positive. And that's led us into now where we are, where we're talking about like, what are the problems that we should be tackling first? I mean, obviously, AI is like heavy in the news. Like, what's next? And I think after today, one of the primary things people want to start look at is into like the legalities of emerging technology and how licenses and copyrights work, and then how does that impact onto other technologies like DLT blockchain. So I think we've got a really, really clear cut out roadmap going forward, but we've also got a high level of enthusiasm and engagement that I never thought we would have had. I don't think we ever would have got if we'd have kept it within one single organization, trying to do it like grassroots or trying to desperately be like the salmon swimming up the river, trying to get that like investment buy-in from senior leadership.
It's interesting that, you know, the way you approach it, talking about the grassroots effort, the growth of the global side, and just some of the benefits of having those broad members brought in. One thing that I do want to touch on was where you're talking about the kind of the follow up from the members meeting earlier, where we were talking a lot about the licensing, the legal aspects, more the governance around the emerging technology rather than the technology itself. And I want to make sure that we're touching on that properly, because some technologists that are listening to this will be like, oh, you know, you're not actually like talking about the technology itself. I'm not really interested in that. I just want to get my hands dirty and I want to play around with it. Mm-hmm. While on the flip side, the business folk that are listening to this will be listening to this as like, oh, you know, you're too technical for me. I don't want to get to that level. I just want the here's the benefit, you know, and we use it and we go on with our day. And really what I kind of want to touch on is that Zenith overall is that cross section between the two. There's benefit for both, and we're actually approaching it from that direction. We're trying to set up some of these technological primers to have that common base that you were referring to, so that it's not a slog for someone to get involved hands-on or get involved technically. Mm-hmm. We're providing at least the kind of initial material that you need to know to be able to jump into it. And if someone from the business side is interested, there are the executive summaries, there's the high level kind of summaries that exist for them to just kind of at least have the talking points, understand what's going on. While on the flip side, that legality and licensing question is something that we are focusing on to address it from a common stakeholder perspective of, of Wall Street and finance in general. So, and with the various stakeholders, being the financial institutions, but also the tech providers, we're kind of, again, dovetailing that all together to try and bring it together from provider, consumer, and governance all around it. And it's something I really wanted to make sure that was highlighted. It's one of the better things of Zenith that doesn't exist today. That's one of the reasons why we kind of kicked this off, was to address this gap and provide that common entry for everyone to just jump in and build off on.
It's building out the primers and then coming up with like those ETACs, emerging technology analysis canvases. That's tying like emerging technology into the business model. And that was, the hard-earned lessons that we've won over all of those salmon impersonations we've done over the years, trying to desperately to get people to even give us like a couple of dollars to go to like a trade show or something so we can learn about this. I mean, you've obviously had more success than I have in terms of this. I mean, I don't know if everybody on the podcast knows, but we're sitting across from one of the only Kiska advocates in Canada on this call. He's like celebrity status. I'm a pretender when it comes to quantum against this man here. We may have started off at the same point, but he skyrocketed in terms of technical implementation. And I mean, that's something you've got in your CV as an indelible record. I'm not sure if you've mentioned this to me enough times today, but isn't it that you're going to go see some quantum hardware in the next couple of days?
Yeah, I don't want to go into too much of the details, but I'm going to have the chance to, I don't know how close I'll get to it, but close enough to be able to physically see a quantum computer in person, hopefully next week. And that's a really cool aspect. To your point, Keith, talking about the Qiskit advocate and just, quantum computing in general, just getting involved. That's part of why I got involved in this as well. It's not just I want to get involved and learn. For those who aren't aware that, the Qiskit advocate program is not only about learning, about being quote unquote an expert to your point, Keith. There's definitely a technical element to getting admitted to the program. But the point of the program is to turn around and bring up the industry with us, or the people in general, anyone who wants to get involved with it. So my focus is not necessarily just diving into the depths and weeds of the technical quantum computing, which I absolutely do because I just love it. But it's also turning around and helping people start or expand their own journey down that learning path. And while the Qiskit Advocate program is one of these avenues, I also look at Zenith as another aspect of this journey. It's a matter of we're all getting there collectively. Let's help each other out. Let's break down those barriers and start building up that knowledge and bringing more people in, allowing for more experimentation, and more people that get involved with it, more diverse kind of mindsets that get involved. The more that we're able to expand, and just it becomes in the best way to describe it, a vicious circle of growth that we all benefit from in these kind of common models.
Yeah. And that's the inspiration, because I mean, I'm always subscribed to the theory that you can teach somebody anything, but what you can't teach is how to get them to hold their attention as they're learning. And if we can at least make the content out there and take advantage of that whole thing of like, if you put something wrong on the internet, 1 million people will come out of the woodwork and correct you. Like, that gives us a point where we are fundamentally collecting baseline understanding on a subject. We have created a proof of concept program so people can start to test out ideas, and they can get support from, members of the Brain Trust who are industry experts, but also from, the technology providers that we've connected with through FINOS and the Linux Foundation who own FINOS. And at that point, giving us a way to really prove out that concept works. And then in the spirit of open source, that anything that we do publish, whether it be the primers or any of our notes or any of our conversations, our blog posts, our position papers, all of those are published open source. Like, you can always come in, you can lift it, you can go and reuse it. I think it's under an Apache license. So you have to give like some accreditation that it came from us originally, but that's about it. You can do commercial derivations of it. And I think that's key because fundamentally there's like a baseline that everybody has to get to before you can start building something on top. And the way we've kind of designed it is that we bring everybody up with us, right? And yeah, it's going to be spurred on by the fact that it's, you know, larger industry that are going to be subsidizing a lot to get us up to that point, either through their commercial direction, their strategic connections into being able to get access to like licenses and platforms, or their collective knowledge of like, well, here's how it really works in the big world. But once it's up there, like people can come in and be like, I've got an idea that I could base off of that and develop something interesting. And that kind of leads us into the latter parts of what we've got planned for like way down the line with Zenith. So if we've got the primers, we've got the POC program, and then we're developing these libraries, what we're trying to do is set up some way to establish deal flow and pipeline for people to be able to work together in a more sort of collaborative way, I think is the best way to describe it. So we partnered up with Tech Passport. So we have Layla White, who is the CEO of Tech Passport. She's kindly joined the Brain Trust to lead some of her insights into enterprise readiness on a lot of these. Because as we start to think about it, the life cycle of these things are, you start off in the lab, you build out a proof of concept, you then build out a minimum viable product. What happens after that? And at that point, you need to start thinking about, well, we need to get enterprise ready to go in and do some fundamental testing within a large organization. Right? And you haven't been in security services in a large organization, no. There's a lot of hoops to jump through, which can sometimes smother like small dynamic businesses who are doing really interesting work in emerging technology. So if under Zenith, we can also explain these are the things that you need to have ready to be innovation lab ready, where you're in a sequestered environment that the bank can understand, and then be enterprise ready to go and start doing testing to be ready for the production environment. Then that means that you can come in, work with us, build out your idea, take that idea, develop your proprietary solutions on the top of that, create your own small or medium enterprise, and then already have an existing relationship with large corporates that actively want to consume this, but maybe don't want to invest in having their own in-house proprietary development team. But they can use the interoperability, they can use the standards of the open source stuff. You have a fundamental understanding of what you need to have in place to work with them. They have a fundamental understanding of what your technology stack is and some of the, you know, knowing that there's not going to be some dependency at the back end that's relying on one guy who's in Missouri on Twitter or something, which I think is a bit of an industry like cliche, but like they know it, that's there, and then you can build on from there. And again, we see a lot within the finance industry just now, especially with like everything that's happened with Silicon Valley Bank at the early part of 2023, starting to look at where is the next deal flow going to be. And every country around the world has really strong focus on innovation for the future. But I think that connection between innovation and market viability is not there. And so we're trying to bridge that also with Zenith so that, you know, members of FINOS and members of the Zenith Brain Trust can take that back to their own organizations, have like the ETAC framework that say this is how it impacts the business model. Here's some interesting companies and interesting developers that are doing it. We've got the choice to either go and buy from these interesting companies or hire these interesting developers to become part of our talent, which at that point starts to make this much more realizable that, you know, from there you can start to really tangibly set out this is going to be a 3-year roadmap for adoption, where instead of way back when they came to us and being like, we're going to give you $6 million for 3 years, how much are we going to get back? And we just went, like, it's going to be, well, we're going to spend it this way and you're going to have this degree of return and we've got these clawback things that can be in there. And that's going to be something that's going to be crowdsourceable across the industry. And I think if we do manage to get that particular part of the formula right, it's really going to create something like even just a structural framework that can change a lot of different industries in a really positive way, bringing open source to the fore of not only fintech, but other areas as well.
That's what I was going to chime in there. Is this approach, this model, if you will, is not just applicable to finance. It's how do we get something that's new broadly applied and grow it collectively. So yes, 100%. And I can't say it enough. I'm really happy that we've gotten to this point. It's been, we talked about it, it's been 3-4 years of a journey with multiple iterations, But where we're at right now, we have the right structure, governance, expertise involved to get it to that next point and grow this to be a, a globally applicable process. And can't be happier for the future.
Mhm. Well, here's one for you. Like, you're much more actively hands-on, but I tend to live in the wonderful world of PowerPoint presentations and like spreadsheets and stuff like this. But you're much more hands-on. Like, in your opinion, what would you think is like the best way for companies and individuals to engage with us at Zenith to really help us take this idea forward and get it off the ground?
It's interesting to how to approach that question, because you mentioned individuals and companies. So I'll tackle it from the individual perspective first, because that's how we pretty much all got started ourselves.
Mhm.
And it's don't be afraid to start. That that first quantum event that we jumped into, it was just a notice that popped up, and we talked about. Said, hey, this is cool. We had no background other than cursory theory, like not even like deep theory, and we just said, let's do it. And I actually remember that final problem, how much we struggled and how very little we actually understood about what we were doing. We just pretty much brute forced our way through to the end.
Yeah, I remember that one
Since
spreadsheet that
then,
I had built on Google Sheets that you just came back, looked at me, and like, there's got to be a more intelligent way of doing this.
and in short, there was, but we made it work. And that kind of, I guess headstrong brute forcing was
Mhm.
just us getting involved with it and just giving it a shot. And that would be, my advice to anyone that comes up and is like, how do I get involved with this? Just start. You will not do well. You will not, most likely, you will not do well. You will not be able to do, 100% of it off the bat. And that's fine. That's
Mhm.
almost expected. It's just getting involved, understanding bit by bit, and then you grow that. You say, oh, this is interesting, or hey, I understood this, and you kind of pivot and kind of work your way through the industry, or through the topics. There was a book that I read recently that was going over Hamiltonian time evolutions. Like, I won't go into the details of it, but the way this particular book described end to end how you first modeled it and how you brought it to completion was the first time in 3 years at that point that I had done these problems before. I knew how to model it. I knew how to actually execute the circuits on quantum computers and get a tangible result. But it didn't click as to how or why we would want to get this done. And for this first time, the book kind of went end to end and explained it. And it clicked. There was that eureka moment where I understood a logistics company has this type of problem that can model this way. Let's get it into this circuit. We run it through this quantum computer. We get the result, and the
Mhm.
result means this to them from a full end to end kind of cycle. And that was that moment where I was like, wow, like if you would have told me this 3 years ago, I'd be like, uh-huh, yeah, cool. Star Trek, talk to you in, 20 years. But building it up bit by bit, starting with the logical components of, hey, that's how you do this. You might not
Mhm.
understand why you're doing this, but you kind of get the nuts and bolts. And then building that knowledge to that more encompassing industry wide or practical application kind of usage is the way to do it.
Mhm.
Now, that's from an individual perspective. From a corporate perspective, it's a little bit different. So as an individual, if you're trying to get your company, your corporation, your firm, whatever, involved in these things, try to find like-minded individuals. Case in point, you and I back in the day. It always helps when you find others. But
Mhm.
if you can't for whatever reason, the way you kind of approach it is what I just kind of mentioned. You take a look at it, literature that's going out in the industry, white papers, the blog posts, whatever, that describes why this could be a benefit to you and your company. Why would you want to get involved with this? And basically start building it like a business case around it. So,
Mhm.
to your point, Keith, $6 million, what we get out of it. Okay, here's what we get out of it. And we start kind of breaking that down. Now that's a little bit more on the business side of things. So you
Mhm.
you kind of have to marry that interest very, very carefully. One of the things that I was trying to do was approach it from that direction, from the business use case identification, while building up in this case, we can call it a grassroots effort of like-minded individuals.
Mhm.
So on one side, I was coming up with the kind of pitch ideas, like you could say, and setting it up the chain. And on the flip side, I was organizing sessions to introduce folks and get them involved with the technology, getting them to start their own journey. Again, similar to the Qiskit Advocate program, but this time just internally with people that I was closer with on a day-to-day basis. And some of those have gone on their own journeys to kind of build up their own knowledge. And the way I describe it is, you're not necessarily trying to build, in the case of quantum, hundreds of quantum experts. What you want is to take people that are working their day jobs, standard business units that do what they do and do it well, and have them become quantum literate in this case, so that they can see what's going on in the industry, see where this emerging technology is coming at a crossroads with things that they are interested with and that they want to build upon, and then bring it in and then explore it from that perspective. It's kind of like the gray area between becoming an expert and going full on into it, and then staying with your day job, if you will, and kind of have that cross section and building upon it in that regard. So those are kind of the two ways I would suggest people to get involved with it, whether the individual or whether you're trying to identify business use cases.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I think that's a good place to leave it because we're just coming up to like an hour of conversation that we've had, which is great. And it's a nice round figure for like the first one. I think at that point, people's attention start to wane. So I think I mean, we've obviously got a lot more things to talk about in the next coming podcast. So we don't want to, burn everything that we've got backed up in fuel just now. But we would like to thank you for tuning in. If you would like to find out more about what we do, you can go to zenith.finos.org. That will take you to our primary page. That'll link to our GitHub. You can see some of the primers, some of the efforts that we're doing, and you can also take part in our regular meetings. We have a public meeting on the last Thursday of the month at 3 p.m. UK time, and I think that's 10 a.m. Eastern. I need to double check that. So if I'm wrong, there'll be a thing just underneath here on the video that'll explain it. And again, we have a lot of fun with those. We bring a lot of mirth and merriment to the production on them. So I think the theme that we're going to have for September is Barbenheimer. So I would definitely jostle you all along to come in for that one. And we'll be releasing these podcasts as and when we create them. So please subscribe onto the service that you're on just now where you're hearing this, because we'll be putting across all the primary services. And come along and join us. We would love to have more conversations with you in depth about emerging technology and how it's going to go in the future. Anything you'd like to say, Pat?
Nothing more than said in the last hour. This is a collaborative journey. We cannot do this without more people. So hopefully this has kind of given you a bit of a background, everyone interested in joining, and we'll see some new faces come the next SIG calls.
Perfect. Right. Well, have a great rest of your day, and we'll speak to you soon. Take care.
Thanks a lot.